I'm Patty Clausen. I'm showing how to put together blocks 7, 8, and 9 of the Stitch Pink Block of the Month from Moda. We're going to be doing block number 7 first. Block number 7 is called Jersey Girl, and it is the Dresden plate pattern. But first, before we do that, I suggest you take out your fabric from your kit. It is labeled already, which I think has been wonderful of the shop to label it. And since the stickers do have a tendency to come off, I would suggest, if you don't already have separate baggies for each color, I would suggest that you take a pin and just pin the sticker so it stays on your fabric. In addition, I would also suggest that you starch every piece of fabric that you have, because in these blocks you're working with bias edges. And so whatever brand of starch method you like to use that. Then separate your fabrics into the 3 blocks. So 101 is the white. So for this block, we will need the square, the 13-inch square of fabric. We also will need, see, number 64 is Duchess, and 365 is Scarlet. And you will also need 328, which is Paradise Pink. You will also need a piece of your large white fabric. First though, on the white fabric, after you've starched it, trim off one edge and cut a 2-inch strip and set it aside. That is going to be used in one of the other blocks. And that way you have the strip already cut. So after starching, you'll cut the 2-inch strip, set that aside, and then you will have the rest for, I should say most of it, for a different block. You will need to cut a circle out of this, and you have a template in your packet that you will be cutting a circle of white, but that can be cut later. So after you have prepared your fabrics, what I did to do my Dresden plate was I used freezer paper. And with a light box or a window, I made templates out of freezer paper. And I figured that was probably the easiest way to get these blades. And then I ironed the freezer paper onto the fabric, the number that it says on the pattern. These 2 are 5 blades each. This color, Paradise Pink, is 10.
Oh, Paradise Pink, which is number 64?
No, 328. It's the larger piece of fabric.
I need 10 blades?
I need 10 blades. Now the layout in the pattern,
and the other 3, 5.
the other 3 are 5. The layout in the pattern has you cut sections of the fabric. I don't think that's necessary, because what I did with mine is I put the paper like this, and it saved a lot of extra fabric. There was a lot of fabric left over.
So you sewed directly on the freezer paper?
No.
Or on the side? Or the edge?
I cut on the freezer paper. I cut on the edge of the freezer paper.
Okay. And then when you sewed,
the paper comes off before you sew.
okay.
Yeah. No, the freezer paper is only a cutting guide.
Okay.
So once you have those cut out, all of them, all 20 blades cut out, then the next step is to prepare them. So with the blade, you fold it right sides together and you sew a 1/4 inch seam across. At the same time as I fold it over, I do a little pinch along the side. So after you've sewn it, you can see I've clipped off a small corner. That will allow room for turning because this is going to be a very narrow point here and it just takes away the bulk. So at this point, I will finger press open this seam. Finger pressed open. And then I can turn it. I have a small tool that I use and can press out the point a little bit. Not too much, or you go all the way through. Went a little too far.
Work.
Yes, chopsticks work. And then you can see at this point where the line of the seam goes is right along that pressed edge so that you get the middle, that the seam is in the middle, and then I just take it over and press it.
Okay, so it seams in the middle. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that's all you do for this, at this point. Then when all of them are done, then I lay them out on whatever surface you wish to work with. And I lay them out and just follow the directions as far as sewing in your pattern. It has you working in quadrants, and you sew 5 blades together, and then you sew those quarters into halves, and then the halves into the full circle. And then they're sewn together, and then this is what it ends up being. Then with your fabric, what I did was I just found the center, and then you can place this accordingly. If you wish to have it where it's in between the blades, you can do that. You can position it however you wish to in the center. You know, if you want it where the center is right between the blades, you can do that, however you wish to. Then when it comes time to do the circle, there again with the freezer paper, I just traced around it and cut it out. You can see here my tracing, and I cut on the outside edge of the template. The dotted line is where I cut.
Okay.
And then I sewed a 1/4 inch in, but before I did that, let me back up. I have 2 layers here. Ideally, you like to do a muslin on the inside. It's a little lighter weight. So on that inside circle, on the muslin, I cut a crosshatch, a square. I just cut on the back so I can turn it. And then I sewed in a very small stitch twice around the circle. And then what I did was trim close to the edge of the stitching. And then it makes it very easy to turn. And then you can just run your finger around the inside to get it round. And then I pressed it.
So we use 2 fabrics.
You can use 2 layers of the
layers?
fabric if you have enough left over, which I'm sure you will have. Or a muslin if you have a muslin, or a very lightweight white fabric.
Okay.
But this enables you to turn it so you don't really have goofy sides as I frequently get on circles. So this was just an easy way, and then you just take it over to the iron and press it. So at this point, before putting the white circle on, when you get it placed how you want it to be, a couple of ways you can do this. You can now pin if you want to, because you're going to applique this on. So you can pin is one method. You can take a glue stick and then just put a little dab of glue on the paper to tack that down. You just want to hold it until you've done your applique. It's not, this isn't intended to keep it permanent. This is also another product that can be used, and just a little drop of glue and press down, and that will keep it as well. Then this is the thread that I used. It's a micro quilter thread, and it's 100 weight. It's extremely thin. And so I did a very small blanket stitch right on the edge on the white side, and then the little stitch went into the fabric. But this was the thread that I used because it's pretty invisible. And then I just appliqued, and then I placed that where I wanted it to be, and I put a couple of pins in that and appliqued that down.
So it's okay if it's thicker than the rest of it?
Yes, it is. It's not that much thicker. This is just 2 layers here. This is, it's pretty thick down at the edge. It's 2 layers, most of it.
Okay.
So it doesn't really matter which method of applique we use.
Not at all,
Okay.
not at all. If you wish to use something totally different, that's up to
Could we
you.
just use the sewing machine and sew it on?
That's exactly what I did.
Oh, okay.
With my sewing machine, I did the little blanket stitch,
Oh, okay.
where it took 2 stitches and then 1 in and then back out and then 2 more in and out.
Right.
And that's the stitch that I used.
Okay.
And yes, I did the sewing machine. I'm not gonna do this by hand.
I did a dress and plate, and it was my first one, but all I did was a straight stitch, and I just went up here, down,
Okay.
and up
that'd be
here
pretty
and
too.
down,
Mm-hmm.
with a different color.
Sure.
And I was wondering if I could.
You could certainly do that. You also have to think, how are you going to ultimately quilt it? If that is if you're going to quilt each block as you go and do that method, that's possible. Or if you want just the decorative stitch on the top with an all-over quilting afterwards, that's great. You know, that's fine
okay.
too. I mean, it's your quilt. You do it how you wish to do it. And some people like to put decorative stitches on, and that's fabulous. It looks wonderful. We're going to work on Fly Away Home, which has the flying geese. So when I looked at this pattern to decide how it was that it needed to be made, I saw all of the individual pieces and I thought, that's not the way for me to do it. If you wish to do it that way, great. But make sure that your fabric is starched and know that you'll be working with bias edges if you do. I decided to do flying geese. So I went online, found this nice little handout. This is by the Spruce Crafts. So this was what I found. And it's just showing you step by step how to do the flying geese. For the flying geese, I cut the large square, which is blocks A and B. So that would be the Rococo and the white. And that makes the A and B blocks. And I cut those at 5.5 inches. And it's a little bit different than
Instead
the
of
pattern.
3/8, cut it at 5.5?
I cut mine at 5.5. That gave me a little tiny bit extra to trim it down.
Okay.
So I wasn't short any.
Okay.
So I cut these 2 at 5.5.
Okay.
And then you mark the
line.
diagonal and sew on
Yes.
both sides, open
Right,
it up,
right.
and then trim it down. And so those were that. Then for C, I cut the squares, which is the white, I cut those at 2 5/8.
2 5/8.
2 5/8. And then for the other two colors, for D and for E, I cut those at 4 1/2 inches. That gave me a little bit of wiggle room to trim down. I didn't trim a lot off, but just enough to be able to make it a nice block.
Okay.
So on my flying geese, on the large square, I put the corners, or the white for the corners, and then I sewed on both sides, and then cut down the middle. This is what I ended up with. Then you press it open. Then I took another square, placed it on top. There again, cut. Sew on both sides of the line and then cut on the line. And that gave me my flying geese. And you need 6 of each color. So one block, one grouping here makes 4, so you need 2 more. So what I did to get my other 2, I took my fabric, put the 2 squares on, only sewed down one side, and then trimmed it off on the line, which I did that with both of them. And then went ahead and finished making the flying geese to give me my 5 and 6. Then with my leftover triangle, this is the one place where I worked with the bias edges. I cut that in half. Cut these in half, and then I was able to turn them to make my center square, which it shows you at the top of the second page, putting the 2 different colors together. And that enabled me, with the squares that I had cut, to not have to cut extra fabric, and I was able to utilize that piece to make that center square. And then I trimmed it down. It's supposed to be finished at 3 1/2 inches, and it just barely makes it, but it does. And then these are sewn together. You sew your flying geese together, all of them in sets of 3, and then you sew it together like a 9 patch.